Today's objectives. Good people will be able to articulate what an ideal workplace environment is, right? Define what constitutes as sexual harassment, racial discrimination, what my role is for diffusing such, maintaining inclusive and equitable workplace. You'll be able to articulate what is expected of you in the workplace, articulate what the process for reporting adverse behavior, and strategies for intervening in instances of workplace misconduct. Like I said, that could be quite the mouthful, right? If anybody can say that 3 times fast, they got $5 for you. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right, so at this point, I would actually like to pass it off to one of the experts here. So Joe, would you mind taking over for me, please?
Absolutely, Dallas. So, a lot of things to keep in mind as you're going through today. The big thing that we want you to get out of it is we want you to feel like you can step into a workplace, that you know the base expectations of like, what are my bumpers, right? Like y'all probably gone bowling before, like you can bowl with the bumpers and life just gets a little bit easier, right? As you get in progressively further into your career, or you get different jobs, like the bumpers that SummerWorks can provide for you may not always be there. So keep an eye out for those things. So I want to ask y'all, and you can answer in the chat, or you can raise a hand and speak up. What do you want out of a workplace? And this can be like as broad as you can think of it. So what do you want from a job? Job security. All right. Clear expectations. Ooh, coming in hot with that one. So we got job security, we got clear expectations, clear communication, right on. Satisfaction in what I'm doing, a safe environment. Safe environment's a big one. Clear directions and communication. Okay. Mutual respect between employees. So we got respect, that's the big word. Interest in the work. All right. Respect. Yep. More respect. Very good. I'll give a second for a few more to chime in here. Water cooler convos. Very nice. Yeah. So we want to be able to socialize a little bit while we're at work too, a good reputation, right? And that can be either like my reputation when I come in, my reputation when I leave, or like I want a workplace that has a reputation of treating people well, of being safe, of having respect between people, right? So, what y'all are kind of getting at are some different ideas that we would very much agree are important to a workplace. What we want is we want to help you be a part of and contribute to a workplace that is safe, equitable, and inclusive. And Nina's going to talk a little bit more about what those things are individually. But again, you're kind of getting at those already. We want to feel that we belong in a place. We want to feel when we're there that we're welcomed there. And everything that we do as employees can either contribute to that or take away from that. Things that we see and maybe not speak up about, or things that happen to us that we don't feel comfortable speaking up about. All of those can kind of contribute to the workplace that we come out with. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Jordan to share a word cloud. Did I totally blow this one up? Yeah. Oops.
Okay. All good. We will just move right past that since you had everyone share in the chat.
Yeah.
And we will pass it right off to Nina since you gave such a lovely segue onto the next portion of this presentation, but all good.
So when we talk about, you gave Joe some examples of what you want from the job with regards to respect and that sort of thing. And it's like, when you go into a workplace, what do I expect? What am I going to see or how will I feel when I get to the workplace? So one of the things we talk about is being inclusive, and everybody wants to feel like what I say matters. Or, we've seen clips of, where there's a boardroom and there's a woman and all men, and then they will have a conversation around the woman and never call on her. So then she feels like what I say isn't important, or they don't want me here, or something like that. So we want to make sure that you feel valued when you're there. And so and you feel like you're engaged in the work environment. Someone talked about the water cooler conversations. Well, that's socializing, but that's also helping you to feel like you are important and that you're part of that team when you're in the workplace. The other thing, when we talk about equity, everybody thinks everybody gets the same thing. Well, that's not necessarily equity. Or so if you look at the slide on the side, you'll see the bikes that they talked about. Everybody has the same bike in the top one, but not everybody can ride that bike. So they have the same bike, but not everyone can ride it. And then when you talk about the one at the bottom, you see where they've actually made a bike to fit the person who had some physical challenges, and they gave them the right bike, the one that would fit them. So when we talk about equity, we talk about everyone having an opportunity to be successful when they go into a workplace, so making sure that, everyone has resources and that sort of thing in order to get them where they need to be, and have the accommodation so that they can feel like they're doing their best. The other thing that we heard in the chat was safety, and when you go into the workplace, you want to find out what things are in place to make me feel safe, whether it's, telling you where things are, safety kits, how to get out of the building should there be a fire, what to do if there should be an active shooter, what to do, just all of these safety things to make you feel comfortable working in that particular environment. And all of us should feel safe there. And then in the one of the other examples talk about, sexual harassment or any type of discrimination as far as safety in those particular cases as well. So when you go into a workplace, you should expect to feel engaged, expect to feel valued while you're there, expect that they're going to give you the resources so that you can be successful in whatever you do in that job. And then making sure that you're safe as an employee, that it's a pleasant working environment, free from sexual harassment, free from any type of discrimination, and other types of safeties, as I mentioned, with regards to any type of how to get out of the building, safety kits, and that sort of thing. So these are the things you should expect when you walk into a workplace. Next slide. Okay. So some of this, it looks like it's discussions as far as why, what you should expect as far as what you should know that you're there, the expectations for your behaviors and that sort of thing. So one of the things that we talk about is when you're in a workplace, what they should expect of you. We talked about what you're going to expect, but when you walk into that workplace, what are they expecting of you? So one of the comments that was there was talking about feeling like you have respect. And I think another one talked about clear communication and that sort of thing. But then there are some things that when you walk in that you need to bring with you. So if you want to be a part of the team, you have to act the part of the team, meaning if there's dress codes, making sure that you're, dressed appropriately. When you come to work, do you look like you're ready for work? Are you on time for work? Can your coworkers depend on you when you get there? That's a big thing. A lot of times people don't feel like they're part of a team. And sometimes the team members will say, well, they're never here. Or when they're here, they're not actively engaged with us. Or they act like they don't want to be here. You're looking off in the corner, or you're on your phone or writing notes, or totally disengaged from the rest of the team. You're not going to fill the part. And at some point, they're going to ignore you because you don't act like you want to be there as well. So just making sure that when you're there, that your behavior says, hey, I'm here to work. that you're dressed appropriately, you're coming to work on time, you're asking questions. If there's anything at work that you don't understand, just asking questions about where things are and how do you do this, as opposed to just sitting there and, again, not being actively engaged with other people around you. So make sure that when you're there, you're just asking the right questions about anything that you don't understand or anything that you need when you're in the workplace. If for some reason you don't feel safe speaking up about there, just asking where things are lets people know, okay, this person is here to work, this person is engaged, and then they'll reach out to you more. And also making sure that that you're doing something interesting, that you're enjoying what you're doing this summer. The whole goal is not only just to get a job, but to make sure that you're enjoying what you're doing while you're there. Any questions for me? So what are some of the expectations you believe that your employer should have for you? What do you think that when you walk into the workplace, they should be expecting of you? And you can put some of those things in the chat. Good attitude, to be on time for my shifts, yes. Responsibility for your actions, absolutely.
I would say to have open lines of communication also.
Yes. Good effort, time management, that you're actually going to do the work while you're there. Yeah, that we won't catch you in a corner napping, right? Sleeping on the job and not doing what you're supposed to do. Yeah, those are all good ones. Yeah. Reliability, exactly. So you're given an assignment and that employee can expect that you're going to do what you're supposed to do, that what you've been assigned to do. So yeah, are you reliable? Are you on time? Are you completing the task in a timely fashion? Those are all things that an employer would expect of you. And I'm going to turn it back. Oh, not bringing your phone while you're working. Yes. So you see people and they're on the phone all the time. Hey, what you doing after work? And can we meet up somewhere? And you're texting and that sort of thing. When your employer is paying you to work and complete an assignment. So just being aware that you're there, you're in a work environment and your employer is expecting you to work, not be on the phone all day or chatting with your friends or texting your friends all day or Facebook or, Instagram or whatever you're doing. So just making sure that you're there to work. Those are all good ones. Joe?
Yeah, thank you, Nina. So we're going to shift gears just a little bit and talk about different unacceptable behaviors in the workplace. And the big thing to keep in mind with this is if the question ever comes up in your mind, like, is this something that I should be doing at work, or is this something that this person should be doing in a work environment? If that question is there, then it may be good to pause. So acceptable behavior can be kind of can be a pretty subjective thing, right? Like every workplace has its culture, and what may seem acceptable in some contexts, if that doesn't sit right with you, that's okay. And we're going to talk about some of those things more in detail. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about sexual harassment. And when we talk about sexual harassment, I want to just be say up front, right? It's an uncomfortable conversation, right? But part of the reason that we are bringing this up with y'all now is so that we can kind of talk about it in what is a safe learning environment and just kind of give you the opportunity to ask questions, right? So sexual harassment is unwelcome and inappropriate sexual remarks and physical advances. When we think about sexual harassment or when we hear about it, typically our brains kind of go to what we see and hear in the media in these big stories, right? What we would term as, sorry, I don't know if I'm cutting out a little bit. Did I freeze?
We can still hear you, Joe.
Okay, all right. What we see in here in the media in these big stories, that what we would kind of identify as these above the iceberg things. So you'll see this iceberg graphic on the slide here.
I think he dropped.
I know, I think I jinxed it.
Am I here?
Oh, you're back. You're back, Joe.
Sorry, hang on one sec. Thank you for your patience, everyone. I swear it's only in the really important meetings that my internet decides to kick out. I was talking about these above the iceberg representations of sexual harassment. That is the things like sexual assault, promising professional rewards in return for sexual favors, what we would refer to as quid pro quo, or this for that. Those things are what we think of as very obvious forms of sexual harassment, and they are something to be aware of and know. And what we kind of want to talk about too is these things that would be considered under the iceberg, the stuff that isn't always seen as being as much affecting someone's experience, right? It is not seen to be as violent or as outlandish as some of these above the iceberg things, but they're still harmful. So sexual harassment includes many behaviors that we might not immediately think of as harassment, like saying a sexist insult or commenting on someone's clothing in a way that makes them uncomfortable, making offensive remarks about someone else's body. And that can include things that you don't necessarily doesn't necessarily have to be happening directly to a person. That comment doesn't need to be made to a person for that to affect them in that way. So, you know, say two people are having a conversation about some sex scene in a show that they watched the previous evening, right? And someone who is walking by overhears it. What we would say is that is sexual harassment, because that is not a topic that should be discussed in the workplace. And by sort of making that harm available to someone else in that space, you've crossed the line into sexual harassment. So I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything here. Can I have the next slide, please? Cool. So this is another graphic that kind of explains some different manifestations of what sexual harassment can be. Ridiculing someone, sharing inappropriate jokes, passing comments on someone's skin color or ethnic traits, discussing an employee's sex life in front of another, right? Like all of these things, while again, they don't necessarily meet this certain above the iceberg definition of sexual harassment, they're still harmful. And whether it is a one-time incident or a small incidents over a long period of time, they affect people, and it's something that we should see as behavior that we should either intervene in or just be aware of. So since some of you are going to be working in a virtual setting, we want to also talk about what sexual harassment can look like in a virtual workplace, right? Your supervisor shouldn't be persistently asking you to meet somewhere outside of your virtual setting. Now, there are good business reasons to have a meeting, right? Like a lunch meetup, or to celebrate a coworker, or coming together for a meeting from time to time. If there is a legitimate reason for everyone to be together, then it makes sense, right? If your supervisor is continually saying, like, let's meet alone, let's meet for lunch every day, I'm buying, those types of things tend to lean into what would be harmful or sexual harassment. if you don't feel comfortable with how they asked, you should not meet up with them. And we'll talk about reporting in a little bit here. Supervisor or coworkers should not be asking overly invasive questions. Those can be about your background, where you live. There is the general like icebreaker stuff, right? Asking, like someone asking me where I went to school, or like, what do I do in my free time? Like those are generally pretty uninvasive questions. If someone were to say like, so you go for a run every Tuesday night at 8:30, do you run by the Dairy Queen? Like that's a very invasive question, right? And someone doesn't necessarily need to be that specific about it for it to be invasive. Anything you're not really comfortable discussing, like you don't have to discuss. Your supervisor or coworker should not ask you for something in return for money, a promotion, or anything like that. So, we talked briefly about quid pro quo sexual harassment, and the same thing kind of applies when whether it's sex or something else, like money or a job promotion or anything like that. So I want to pause for a moment and ask if there are any questions about what is and is not sexual harassment. I mean, we don't want to necessarily get into too many what ifs, because there are a lot of what ifs when talking about this topic. And I also want to leave space for Nina to add anything. Nina's got a lot more experience than I do, so.
You're doing fine.
Oh, I know. I know I'm doing fine. Okay. Well, if there are no questions, and they can come up later too, we are going to do a brief quiz. Everyone loves a quiz, right? And I think Jordan is going to be running that part of it. There we go. So there will be a quiz that just got dropped in the chat. Go ahead and open that up. We'll just take a moment for y'all to answer some of those questions.
So when we get those results, Zoe, do they pull up on your end as to, I guess, what percentage of our audience selected what?
Yeah, so Jordan, I think, is going to share the results as they pop up.
Okay, good deal.
All right, so looks like we have a couple of responses still coming in. We can start talking about these though. So what are some things employers can expect from you? Appropriate behavior, being on time, following the dress code, all of the above is the correct answer. And those are things that y'all mentioned in the chat. So nice work. Next one, which of these inappropriate behaviors is above the iceberg? Nude images posted at work, promising professional rewards in return for sexual favors, unwanted sexual discussions, or relentless pressure for dates. Most of you chose promising professional rewards in return for sexual favors. That was one of the items that was above the iceberg on the graph. And these other answers are they're still sexual harassment, right? Like I think I might have mentioned it, but not said it outright, is that everything that was on that diagram is something that is sexual harassment. So, I mean, nice job regardless. So the next one, what are some ways that sexual harassment can take place in a virtual setting? A supervisor asking you to meet them somewhere, a coworker supervisor asking overly invasive questions, quid pro quo, or all of the above. Again, any of these are examples of sexual harassment, right? All of the above is the best answer because it captures all these things. So a supervisor asking you to meet them somewhere, again, like for a legitimate business reason, and when it matters to the job, like orientation or, you know, picking up equipment from an office, like not really a problem. But when it becomes persistent, when it is persistent asking to meet them alone, that's where it gets into that territory. So nice job, y'all.
All right, I think we can go back to the other slides, Jordan. Thank you for going back and forth. And I think Nina is going to talk a bit about discrimination. We're making Jordan work for her pay today, so.
All right. So when we talk about discrimination, one of the things I want to talk about when we talk about sexual harassment and discrimination, there are laws protecting us as individuals when we're going into the workplace. So you need to know that you have a right to a professional work environment. You have a right to go into a place and expect that you're not going to be sexually harassed or discriminated against. And there are federal laws that are protecting you when you go into a workplace. So one of the things this talks about is taking an adversarial action against a person based on their identity. And this could be because of your sexual orientation, your race, your religion, your ability, your age, your gender, all of these things that a person can bring up and actually discriminate against you. Maybe you are doing the same job as someone else in the department, and because one is a male, one is a female, and maybe the male gets a raise for doing that job, and you're doing the same job, and your quality may even be better than theirs, but that person gets a raise and you don't. They've discriminated against you because of gender, giving, that male an increase and then not giving you an increase. Sometimes it's not so obvious. Maybe you had an idea and you're sitting and these are, considered like microaggressions. Maybe you're sitting in a room and they ask you for ideas, and you give an idea and no one responds to it. No one reacts. Another person says almost the exact same thing. Oh, that's a great idea. That was a wonderful idea. And you said, I just said that. And they ignored you and didn't say anything when you gave your reaction or your idea, when you put your idea on the table. So just thinking about these things when you're in the work environment, when these things happen, they make you feel like, we talked about inclusion and equitable and safety and all those things. But when you start to feel discriminated against, you feel like maybe I don't belong here. So a lot of times what people do, they'll either shut down and will stop giving their opinion, their ideas, and sharing things, or you find that a person may start being absent from work, just not showing up, or when they're there, just not giving their best 100% because they don't feel like I belong, or I'm comfortable there, or I'm valued, and that sort of thing. So just understanding that sexual harassment and discrimination, those are things that are protected by the law, and it's your right as an employee when you go into a workplace to expect to be treated fairly when you're working there. So when you're there, again, you ask questions and those sorts of things. And then Joe, he'll talk about how to handle these things when they come up and what to do. And then we'll talk a little bit about later about reporting them. Next slide. I think it's you, Joe.
Yeah, so it's when harassment happens, handling it is a very person-to-person thing, right? Because we all experience harm differently. As Nina said, the law protects you. The law ensures that you have a right to a safe and equitable workplace. And when things happen, how you interact with the individual who is causing the harm, how you follow up on it, it all depends, right? And we're going to talk just in general, like what are some ways to do that? So, I mean, sorry, when harassment happens, it's always a good idea to write everything down. It is valuable both for you, and if you're not the person experiencing the harassment, to have on hand as a close record of what happened, because Nina mentioned investigations earlier, and when harassment happens, that's what goes on, right? It's not a simply like, okay, it happened, someone is in trouble and we're moving on. There's always some investigation process to it, and the more you can write down, and we struggle as people to remember details of situations. It helps you, and it helps everyone involved to write everything down. We're going to talk about some different ways to engage with people who are harassing or engaging in acts of discrimination. And one of them is a very directly telling the person to stop. Even if you feel like you may not have power over that person, or you're not their supervisor or whatever, a voice telling someone to stop usually stops the behavior, because it gets the other person to think twice about what they're doing, at least in the moment. Getting help either from a colleague or a supervisor, recruiting others to say like, hey, this doesn't feel right. Is this something we should report? Is this something that I can get your help confronting this person about? Is a valuable tool, especially when, I mean, I know this may not serve an HR person well, but I am not a conflict forward person. And I struggle in those situations to think of how I'm going to engage with folks. There's a thing here about writing a letter to the harasser. I mean, this is kind of in part of, if someone is harassing you, or they're asking you, or they're, say someone is relentlessly pressuring you to go on a date with them. You said no in your conversations. You've said no to this person multiple times. Writing an email to the person saying, you've asked me on a date a couple of times. I'm asking you to stop doing that. I am not interested, right? Is one way to very clearly communicate to that person that you're not interested. And that's also writing it down in a sense. Contacting a school official to talk about the harassment, depending on the situation or your work environment. And this will be a part of your orientation with most of your departments is, and a good question to ask is, who do I tell? Where do I go to? Some of the questions that tend to get forgotten when folks come into a new workplace is, and it's not comfortable and no one wants to ask, but, if my supervisor is harassing me, who do I tell? Because that is the case sometimes where the person who you would report to is the one who is causing the harm. And then talking with your parents or another trusted adult about the situation. If you are feeling in this place, and it is a very valid place to be in of, I have experienced this treatment, or I've seen this behavior. I don't know that I feel like I can report it or talk to someone about it. Find a trusted person and tell them. This is very deep and necessary to know. Thank you, Alexis. It really is, because we see it in HR often, right? And I will share a very general example from one of my previous organizations that I've been a part of. We had a situation where on the night shift, one of the employees was regularly looking at pornographic materials on a work computer in a public space. We found out because a month and a half after it had been happening on regular occasions, it had gotten around to us through like not even someone who saw it reporting it. It was a rumor that got passed, and then we investigated it and found out that yes, that person had been basically exposing lots of people to stuff that they didn't want to see at work for over a month and a half. So that's one small example, not small, excuse me. That's one example, but as we mentioned, there's a lot of forms that harassment can fall into. I think I'm going to pass it off to Nina at this point.
So when we talk about reporting, I mentioned earlier that my team, we're responsible for conducting investigations when we receive a complaint from an employee. Our policies at Washtenaw County even cover vendors, meaning that if you have someone who's coming in your department, it's just a vendor, a third-party person who does not work for the county, but maybe they come in every day and they're starting to harass you, call you out your name, babe, honey, can I, take you out, those sorts of things. So when they start to do business with the county, they sign a contract that they will abide by all of the county policies and that sort of thing. So if for some reason it's a vendor, Joe mentioned, other employees as far as exposing other employees to what you're doing, but it could be even outside of work. Let's say you're going to a conference and someone has had too much to drink and start to come on to you. And maybe it's your supervisor who is doing this. And there was an incident that we had similar to that, where they're all at a conference and you're thinking you're outside of work. You're still covered because it's at work. It's a working event. And so there at the conference, there was a social gathering part of the conference, like a networking sort of thing. There was alcohol that was served, and the supervisor had too much and then started to come on to one of his subordinates. There were other witnesses who saw that and intervened for that particular individual. But you can imagine how that person would feel if there hadn't been anyone there to witness that, or if there hadn't been anyone to actually, intervene on that person's behalf. So sometimes people don't say anything, feeling like if I say something, I'm going to lose my job. If I say something, they won't believe me. If I say something, then it'll get around in the department and other people will find out and they'll start to say, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal. Why are you making a big deal out of it? That sort of thing. So there are a number of reasons why a person won't come forward and talk about what happened. But these are important things because, again, we talk about the law protects you as an individual working in that environment. So whether it's a coworker, a vendor, your supervisor who is making it an uncomfortable environment for you, you need to speak up. If it's not you, it's probably someone else that they're harassing as well or have harassed. So that's why it's important to say something so that the behavior can be stopped and addressed. If you don't say something, then, it will continue. And you hear this stuff in the news all the time where people are going back 15, 20 years and say 20 years. Yes, I worked with this person and they were doing something and they said this to me or did this to me. But because no one felt comfortable coming forward, that person continued the behavior as far as sexual harassment or either discrimination in most cases. So if for some reason you are feeling harassed, whether it's sexual harassment or if you're experiencing discrimination, it's important to say something. Joe talked about writing a letter to the individual or something like that. One of the things that if you're coming to me or you're going to someone to actually report, we're going to ask you for dates and times and that sort of thing. And so as Joe mentioned, it's important to write down everything, dates and times, keep track as much of things as much as possible. Once we receive that information, we're going to talk to you a little bit more just to get a better picture as to what we're going into. Is it really sexual harassment? Is it something that crossed the law? And the reason I say that is because sometimes we've had instances where people come to us saying that it's sexual harassment, and it's just a workplace conflict as far as you don't like your boss, or you and your boss are just having a conflict. It does not break a law, that sort of thing. Yes, it still probably needs to be addressed, but addressed in a different venue or a different way, because the law does not protect just because you and your boss don't get along, or you and another coworker don't get along. That kind of behavior is not protected under the law. So we're talking about sexual harassment or discrimination and those sorts of things. If for some reason you can't go to your supervisor about another coworker, and sometimes you don't go to your supervisor because you know that person is protected by your supervisor. Maybe that person is very close to your supervisor. So, you know, even if I went to the supervisor is not doing anything to me or harming me. But if I go to the supervisor, I still may be in trouble or ignored because that person who is harassing me is very close to my supervisor. You can go to your success coach or to anyone else you feel comfortable with, a parent, a counselor, a friend, a pastor, an adult, anybody else you feel comfortable with, to report that. And then they can carry that information forward to the appropriate people. But it's important that you speak up and that is timely, just making sure that, we have that information. Sometimes, people have said in cases that I've dealt with at the county, they'll say, this has been going on for 8 months or 9 months. Well, that's too long. And you ask, why did they wait so long? And again, it's the stress and the pressure of, should I say something? Or, will they believe me if I say something? How will my coworkers respond to me if I say something? So again, just making sure, just letting you know that you are protected by the law and that it is your right. So making sure that you go. During the investigation, usually we're speaking with various parties, witnesses, who, what, when, where, how, all of those questions that we're asking individuals about what happened. And then in the end, to determine whether there is actually a case or sexual harassment or some kind of discrimination has been done. And it's at that point that we start to take the appropriate action, whether it's discipline for that individual or either termination. So again, it's your right to make sure that you're in a pleasant working environment. So make sure you take advantage of every resource that's there, ask questions. If your supervisor's asking you to do something that's unsafe, ask questions. Where are the appropriate PPE or safety kits or something like that? Why am I asked to go? Maybe they're asking you to go in a particular area, but they wouldn't ask anyone else. Why am I being put in harm's way and not this particular individual? And before you do it, just because a supervisor says, ask you to do it, make sure you reach out to someone else and let them know what is being asked of you, what they're telling you to do that is putting you in harm's way. So again, ask questions, speak up, don't be afraid when you're in the workplace. A lot of times when young people are in the workplace, especially if it's your first job, there tends to be a tendency to not speak up and not say things because you're not comfortable. But again, know that the law is on your side. Know that there are people that are wanting and willing to help you, there to help you, but they need to know. No one can address things if you don't say anything. So make sure you speak up. Next slide.
So another way to help maintain an inclusive workplace and to make sure that you are doing what you can to keep the workplace a safe place is to be someone who intervenes when they see the kinds of harms that we've been talking about in this meeting occurring. So in the next slide, we will present some strategies that you can utilize to intervene. But before we do that, I just wanted to ask if anybody here has witnessed harm, it could be sexual harassment or anything else otherwise happening, and has intervened. And if so, what strategies did you use to do that? You can come off mute or you can put it in the chat. Okay, so I think it's a good thing then that we're going to teach you some bystander intervention strategies. Can I get the next slide, Jordan? Thanks so much. So when we think about bystander intervention, we're thinking about what we call the 4 Ds. So the 4 Ds are direct, delay, distract, and delegate. So I'm going to give a situation and then I will walk through what the different ways you could apply these 4 Ds to that situation are. So let's say you're in a team meeting and you're thinking about how to assign tasks for an upcoming project. When it comes to working with spreadsheet calculations, Ben, one of your coworkers, suggests that June, who has shared with you that their family immigrated to the US from China, should do it because, quote, June is probably good with numbers. So if you were to intervene on that directly, you would directly address the person who has made an inappropriate comment. And in this case, you might say, Ben, that felt like a harmful thing to say. Or you might ask Ben, can you explain what you meant by that? And doing that will force Ben to explain what assumptions he was making that would lead him to say that June is good with numbers. And that kind of exposes the bias in what he's saying, and that kind of diffuses the moment and stops the harm from continuing to happen. If you were to delay, that would mean waiting until after the situation is over to check up on the individual who was harmed in order to figure out what should be done next. So in this case, you might wait until after the meeting is over and then find June and ask June, are you okay? Or you might say, June, I'm really sorry for not speaking up in the meeting. How are you doing? You might also use the delay tactic to confront the person who made the microaggression. So you might approach Ben after the meeting and say, Ben, why did you say that? What were you thinking? I think that was hurtful. Any number of different ways you could approach that. Distracting is to interject or to insert yourself in the interaction and to get the attention of either the perpetrator or the person being harmed in order to stop that interaction from continuing. So in that case, you might interrupt and you might say, oh, June should do it because she's ready for a new challenge. Or you could say, if you know that Ben has said similar things before, you could interject and suggest that you use a different kind of decision-making strategy in the moment. One tip here is that if someone is being direct on their own behalf, don't distract. So if June was saying, Ben, what did you mean by that? Or Ben, why did you say I'm probably good with numbers? Don't distract because it will look then like you are taking Ben's side rather than trying to help June. Let that person continue to kind of have that conversation out, however it is that they want to move it forward. And then finally, you can delegate. So get someone who you know is capable of handling these situations to come in. This can be a supervisor, a trusted peer, the HR person at your office, like someone who you know is the person who is capable of dealing with this. Delegating oftentimes will happen after the fact, but it can also happen in the moment if the exchange is going on for a long time and you can kind of get away, or if that person happens to be in the room. So you can say like, you know, hi, whoever your trusted advisor is. Did you hear what Ben said at the meeting today? I'm unsure of what to do. Or you could, if they're in the room, make eye contact. You could bring this to them later and explain what happened and ask for their advice on how you should handle it, or ask if they can step in and talk with Ben, that sort of thing. And then can anyone think of any other potential options of what to do when you see a harm occurring?
I'm not sure for this particularly, but I've experienced it third hand, I guess, in terms of I've been part of sports my whole life, and I'm really into soccer, and I've been to so many different camps for colleges. And one thing is that weird about those is that you're coming in with players that you've never met before, and you don't know their backgrounds or where they're coming from or what they've experienced. They could be coming from across the country. So, it can, starting a relationship even there can be quite strange. And during one of the times that I was, this was at one of the camps, it was sadly at U of M's camp. And during like this on the sidelines, a few players were talking about how, talking inappropriately about, trans players, or, if they were a girl or, a female, they would totally, blow every other female out of the water in terms of playing soccer, and making other types of lewd comments like that. And this was away from the coach. He was away when they were discussing this. And they definitely did not sit right with me. And, I used some expletives when I told them that, just, to shut up. And I said a few other words, and, sometimes you just need to talk to the person directly, and also let the coach know, and the coach eventually overheard and rectified the situation, thankfully, as well. But yeah, that's the only time that I've experienced it. But I'd say in the sports culture, or in kind of like, that kind of bro aspect of it, it can definitely, at first, nobody said anything because it was definitely really uncomfortable. And then it just took somebody to just, put their foot down and say, hey, that's completely unacceptable on all levels.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like you did a great job being direct and also delegating by talking to the coach. And that was, I'm sure, really hard, but also really, really important that you stepped in. Lucas says one of the things you can do is to talk to the victim and see if they perceived it as a harm. I totally agree that that is important. If you are going to delay and wait, you do want to figure out how the person you are talking to is feeling about the situation. So that is really wonderful advice. And then Dallas says that he's had to be involved with removing someone from the situation, so asking them to work on a different project as a distraction technique, which could also definitely work. The thing we don't want to do really is to stay silent. As Nina was talking about earlier, when somebody is harassing people or discriminating against people, oftentimes you'll find out years later that this has been like a pattern of behavior with them. And so if we stay silent, we allow the harm to be perpetuated, we make the workplace more unsafe for the people who are being harmed, and we create the conditions that allow the harasser or the discriminator to continue to do those harmful behaviors. So I think staying silent is something we want to try to take off the table as a response. Could I get the next slide, please? And then, so we also want to think a little bit about addressing harm. So when we ourselves are the people who cause harms, the first thing to note is just we all mess up at some point. It's going to happen to you in your long careers. And once that's done, it's done. Sometimes the relationship can be repaired and sometimes it can't. And sometimes it takes a really long time to rebuild trust, but that doesn't mean that the right thing to do isn't to try, because it is. So the first thing you want to do is to apologize. There's nothing definite about how people will respond because they respond differently. But an apology is always the right way to start and the right way to go. If your coworker is willing, then you also want to have a conversation about the harm that you caused. How did they interpret it? What were they hearing? And be receptive to what it is that they have to say. And take seriously that even if what you said didn't feel like a big deal to you, that it might have felt that way to that person if that's what they're saying to you. So listening to understand rather than listening to respond. If you don't understand what you did, why that was harmful, you might want to reach out to HR, you can reach out to us, you can reach out to a trusted advisor in the moment to help you learn and to have a conversation and provide you with resources that will give you more context for why what you did was interpreted harmfully. And then you want to remember also that we are not the judge of what harms someone else. So if someone says that they have been harmed by something, that's something for us to take seriously and to try to address it on those terms and in terms of their experience. And then finally, you want to know that there isn't always going to be closure after a harm has been committed. It's not like when you say that you're sorry, that necessarily makes that person trust you again. So there may not be this sort of like neat moment that feels like a clean healing, but you know, you've done the right thing if you have apologized and you've listened and you've tried to understand things from their perspective. So sometimes it's best to apologize, to go through those steps, and then to move on and allow the person who has been harmed to set the terms for the relationship moving forward.